I was in Zambia, working for a company that basically offered products that rural farmers, business persons, etc. would need to help grow their business, on credit. The company had agents, basically mobile salespeople located all over the country who had information I needed to complete my project. I was required to travel around with 2 other guys to each of these agents, tent in various places, people's backyards, side of the road, churchyards, etc., for a couple days, and collect the information and data I needed. This is where my story really starts. I was staying in a little town called Kabampo, meeting with an agent named Mr. Ndumba. Now Mr. Ndumba was honestly one of the most unique and interesting people I had ever met. He was somewhere between the age of 60 and 70, he changed his mind about how old he was almost every day, he had a wife and a younger girlfriend who his wife was completely cool with, and he played pool for about 5 hours every day. This man was literally the most legendary person to ever set foot in Kabampo. My tent was set up in the yard of a beekeepers association where I worked with Mr. Ndumba while my co-workers went on to another town to conduct other business. For a couple of days while staying with Mr. Ndumba we traded jokes, or so I thought, about our preference in women. Mr. Ndumba would come to me and say, "Mr. Kliss, I have to know which you prefer, Zambian women or Canadian women." It may sound like an innocent inquisition, but Mr. Ndumba was talking about which I preferred in bed. Also, my name is Chris, but he sometimes mixed up high R's and L's. I'd always respond with, "I have no idea, Mr. Ndumba, I've never been with a Zambian woman before." To which he'd reply, "Well, Mr. Kliss, I will find you a Zambian woman and you will tell me." I'd always respond with, "Mr. Ndumba, if you find me a Zambian woman, I'll find you a Canadian woman and then you can tell me." We'd share a laugh and continue working on whatever it was we were working on. Fast forward a couple days, I'm laying in my tent, wearing only boxers, and drifting off to sleep when I hear a faint whisper outside of my tent. "Mr. Kliss." I lay there wondering if I had in fact actually heard a noise when, there it is again. "Mr. Kliss." The voice undoubtedly belongs to the one and only Mr. Ndumba. "Yes, Mr. Ndumba?" I say gradually. "I need you to come out of your tent." He replies, the tone of his voice hinting at a fountain of excitement bubbling up within his very being. I rolled over and checked the time. 1:34 a.m. "Just a moment, Mr. Ndumba," I replied. I get out of my sleeping bag and crawl to the entrance flap of the tent, pull back the zippers and stick my head outside. There stood Mr. Ndumba with 3 very beautiful, young girls who were dressed to the nines. I honestly thought I was dreaming for a moment. Mr. Ndumba, a childish grin stretched across his smooth face, and 3 girls standing idly behind him still seemed so surreal. Still smiling the biggest smile I've ever seen, Mr. Ndumba says, "Mr. Kliss, look at what I've brought you. You can take any one you want or you can have all 3. At this point it has sunken in that Mr. Ndumba has bought me 3 prostitutes so that I can finally tell him what type of woman I prefer. I explained to him that I have a girlfriend back in Canada who would not be happy if I took part in this crude version of the scientific method that Mr. Ndumba had assembled outside of my temporary residence. He assures me that this is not a problem because he will never tell my girlfriend on me. After about 5 minutes of telling Mr. Ndumba that this really is a bad idea, he starts to understand. "Okay, Mr. Kliss, I guess it's all 3 for me," he says, still radiating a childish happiness that I assure you only Mr. Ndumba is capable of. Mr. Ndumba turns and makes his way into the night, followed by the 3 surprisingly beautiful prostitutes. God only knows what they got up to that night. Well, God and myself, Mr. Ndumba was sure to discuss his eventful evening with me the very next day. At work,